Well, hello, everybody. We are live on YouTube, and I have a guest with me, Lynda Cheldelin-Fell. And Lynda, we know some of the same people in the grief world, and I don't know if you remember, we talked, I don't know, a year or so ago. We had Linda Finley on with us, and we just had a conversation about an event that was going on, possibility of things, and so we don't know each other real well, but we know of each other anyway. And just I really felt like I wanted to have you join us on these live times here that we're having for this month of May. And let me just share with people just a little bit about you, and then we're going to go ahead and jump into a conversation. So Lynda is a founding partner of the International Grief Institute, and she's a best-selling author of over 35 books, and most that you're known for are the Grief Diaries, correct?
Yep.
Okay. And she's a speaker, coach, all kinds of other things. You help funerals with aftercare, just you're just very involved in the world of grief. And we're just very blessed to have you here with us tonight and to get to know you a little bit better and to just share a conversation and let people in on it who are hurting and hopefully can benefit from this. So thank you, Lynda, for being with us.
Thank you for hosting this information. It's really helpful for people who've lost someone they love to learn from other people who speak that same lost language. So thank you for doing this.
I like the way you said that. Speak the same love loss language. That's great. I like that. So, Lynda, I know about your daughter's accident, but I've never heard the story directly from you. So I would really love it if you would share her story with us, please.
Yeah, thank you. 2 years before she died, I had a dream. Now I have 4 living children, and I I had this dream that our third born, our daughter Allie, was a backseat passenger in a car that flew off a road and sank into a lake. And the only thing she left behind was this open book floating face down on the water. And I was so shaken up by that dream, it just absolutely knocked me to my core. And 2 years later, our daughter Allie, our third born, died in a car accident as a backseat passenger coming back from a swim meet.
Oh,
And she was 15 years old at the time. And it just absolutely stopped my world. Life as I had known it shattered into something that I didn't recognize.
hmm. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. We just never expect
There's no
anything like
words.
yeah,
It,
and there isn't. There really isn't. And every time you meet another parent and hear about their loss, I just always think I can't imagine losing my child that way. I can't imagine having that set of circumstances. And I mean, to have a dream about it, and I mean, it's got to be hard not to let your mind run away with it when you have a dream like that. I mean, you convince yourself that's not going to
right,
happen.
right.
That's
But
just a
the
dream.
truth is, but the truth is that dream has since brought me comfort because I have very strong faith. And to
Mhm.
me, in looking back, it was God's way of giving me a heads up. And what I didn't know then that I know now is, in the dream, she left behind an open book floating on the water, not a backpack, not a cell phone, not a hairbrush, not all the things that a 15-year-old girl normally has. And what I didn't know was that I would go on to accumulate and curate stories about loss from people around the world into grief diaries. And so that dream now brings me comfort because to me, it was God's way of saying, there's something that's going to happen, but you're going to turn pain into purpose and do something with that is
Mhm.
going to help others. And so that gives me great comfort.
It is strange in our world, the things that a lot of people would think, oh my goodness, it's a relief to us or a comfort to us. Even in this topic that we're going to talk about tonight, in talking about the confusion and how we just feel so disoriented, and how we're just it's like we're losing our minds, we're going crazy. And to someone else, if they hear, oh, that'll probably happen to you for 3 to 5 years, hon, and beyond. You know, I mean, someone else would think, oh my goodness, that's horrible. But for us who's going through it, if it's been 3 years and I'm still so confused and disoriented, it's a comfort, it's a
Yeah.
relief. Yeah.
It is because,
Now,
and there's a physiological reason behind that. But, we live in a grief phobic society. And so we're not taught about grief as children. And we're taught about the birds and the bees, but we're not taught about death. And what happens, especially when you lose a loved one unexpectedly and traumatically, your brain secretes all these stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline and norepinephrine. And what happens is it anesthetizes other parts of your brain. And this goes on for, I don't remember much from the first 2.5 years
yeah.
after Allie died. I have just little snippets. And I
Hmm.
remember thinking, oh my gosh, am I developing early Alzheimer's?
Exactly.
What's
Yeah.
going on? And
Hmm.
because again, I was not aware. I was expecting to go through these 5 stages of grief, and anything but that happened. And I couldn't remember anything. Well, again, going back to the stress hormones that the brain's secreting in the aftermath of a traumatic loss, it causes that confusion, and it causes us to have trouble understanding. I remember trying to reread sentences for the longest time. My brain just couldn't make sense of it. And it's really scary. You think you're losing your marbles.
Yeah.
And really it's just the brain's way of dealing with trauma. And so what I want people to know that I didn't know then was that it's normal to not be able to remember anything. It's normal to think you're losing your marbles. It
Hmm.
really is. You're trying to process a whole lot of things going on. Your world's been turned upside down. On top of it, your brain's secreting all these stress hormones. You're not in control of anything, at least it feels like. And so it's pretty scary, because when it's happening to you, you're not, you feel very out of control.
Hmm.
And what I want parents to know, or anyone who's lost a loved one, is that is actually very, very normal.
Yeah. I mean, we feel like we've lost control of our life because
Yep.
our child died. And then we have our whole mind. It's like nothing feels under control. And that's scary, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And especially, you think about how uh, a lot of society follows the different grief models, and the models are based on theories about what people might go through, but they're theories. And
Hmm.
so I expected to go through a certain set of stages. And when that didn't happen to me, I felt like I was failing grief. Why wasn't it happening to me that way? And
Hmm.
further, after losing Allie, I remember people saying, well, I'm waiting for the old Lynda to come back. And after 6 months or a year, you think, oh, I've passed the 1 year mark, life is going to return to normal. And anything but that happens. And really, life is loss is a process of learning to live with your loved one in your heart instead of your arms. And for many, it can take a whole lifetime to do that.
For sure, for sure. And a lot of this, I think people don't realize, you've mentioned it several times, there's an actual chemical imbalance in your brain that has happened. The trauma has caused actual changes in your brain.
Right. And we think about how in times of stress, your brain secretes the stress hormones, the cortisol, norepinephrine, adrenaline, and that is designed to save your life. But when you lose someone you love, especially traumatically and unexpectedly, the brain continues to secrete that for a long time. And your body's not really designed for that. So what happens is that your immunity starts getting low. You start coming up with every cold and virus coming around the corner. And everything just becomes very hard. So on top of processing this loss, your body is trying to withstand everything that you're going through as well. And so losing a child, which is my lost language, it's really about learning to rebuild from the ground up. And it takes a long time.
Yeah. And once I was thrown into this world that I knew nothing about. I mean, I had not, I don't know about you, Lynda, but I had not faced any deep loss of an immediate family member. I mean,
I hadn't
we were
either.
blessed. My husband and I both had both of our parents. I mean, there was,
Mhm.
so the first immediate family member that I lost was my daughter. And I had absolutely no grid for this kind of grief whatsoever. I mean, nothing. And not that, I mean, you can't compare losses, and you can't, the whole child is worse than a parent kind of a thing. Now, most people who have gone through that will say there's, my child was 10, so much more worse. But in not having any kind of a grid whatsoever was really hard. It was really hard because it made it even more confusing for me, because I'd never grieved anybody before,
Right.
really.
I hadn't
And I,
either. That our daughter's loss was the first significant loss of my entire family as well. And both of my husband and I, our parents are still alive and such. And so we had no grid for it either, which makes what you're doing so critical, because it gives hope to other people who are on the journey behind us or just beginning the journey, that hope that if we can survive it, maybe they can as
mhm.
well.
Yes, exactly. And I know one of the things that I discovered as I started this journey, and some of that confusion started lifting, and, having to figure out, for me, um, the thing that really struck me um, was that I knew that God wasn't blindsided by this like I was. And if he lives in me, then the seed of hope is in me. And so I had to figure out how to nourish that seed of hope so that it could grow and I could get out of that darkness and back into the light. And one of the things that I discovered, which was shocking but helpful to me, was that a lot of experts will say that the death of a child is the greatest grief that you can experience. It's considered traumatic grief, it's a trauma. And that uh, and I know there are a lot, like I said, I'm not trying to compare the grief, but it is a trauma. When you lose a
Mhm.
child, it's considered a trauma. A lot of parents have PTSD that go along with it, and you don't even have to be there. It's all dependent on how your child died and just all kinds of factors. And the other thing that really surprised me was to find out that most experts that I found say that anything 5 years and under is considered fresh grief from the
Yes.
death of a child.
Yep. I would agree. Absolutely. And I think that that's one of the hardest things for society to wrap their brain around, because we're so conditioned that, you might take a year of mourning and then life goes back to normal. And really, especially for parents who've lost a child, it takes a long time to find your footing in life. And for my own story, I don't remember much from the first 2.5 years, just like little snippets of
Mhm.
memories. And it was after that when I started to feel like I was starting to come out of the fog. And really, it wasn't about until about year 5, year 6, when I started feeling that life might actually have hope again. And I have to say, for me, I had to fight for it. I
Mhm.
had to fight. I remember feeling like I was in the belly of hell, and I could either sit there or I could fight my way out. And I was determined to fight my way out. And it takes time to do that because we're not equipped, we're not given tools, we're not
Right.
giving some kind of handbook that says, here's how to grieve the loss of a child. And it's unique to each of us. But I remember thinking, I'm going to have to fight for this. But I
Mhm.
did. And I can honestly say now, it's been 10 years. Last summer was the 10-year anniversary of our daughter's accident. And I remember thinking that, wow, on one hand, it feels like a lifetime ago, but on another hand, it feels like yesterday. And that's the interesting thing about grief, is that sometimes it can just knock the wind out of you. And other times you think, okay, I found my rhythm and I have found some normalcy again in life. But really, you've got to fight for it. You've got to take care of yourself, advocate for yourself, and fight for that nugget of hope. And if you
Mhm.
fight for it, you'll find it again. You will.
Yeah. And that's interesting. It's even fighting for that nugget of hope. I mean, that's how deep, dark in the pit we are. It's such a
That's how profound the
suffocating.
loss is. Yeah.
I mean, it was like I didn't even know this kind of darkness even existed.
No. Mm-mm.
I didn't even know it existed. And so, yeah, to even fight for that there's even hope to get
Yeah.
out of this.
Yeah.
And the hard thing is for those first 2, 3 years, it can easily be we're just struggling to survive. It's like you're
To
talking
get out
about
of bed.
fighting for hope. I'm doing good. I think it was Mitch Carmody the other or yesterday I was talking to him and he talked about it was like a couple of years in. It's like I made it to the coffee pot today.
Yeah.
I mean we're just yeah. I mean we all get it. We all totally get it. So the thought of going from I'm barely surviving here, I go to work because I have to. I function on autopilot. I go home and I'm done until I get up the next day. So that's hard to hear that you have to fight for it, but you do get to a point where you can and you want to. You can make that choice.
Right. And that's what I want parents to know, because here was my turning point. Before the accident, we're surrounded by trees and wildlife and such. And I often slept with our bedroom window open. And so every morning, especially this time of year, I would hear the birds. And I
Mhm.
always loved the sound of bird sing song. And after the accident, my window was still open. And I remember laying in bed feeling like my world had become void of technicolor. There was no beauty, there was no joy, there was no sound. It was just gray. It wasn't even 50
Mhm.
shades of gray. It was just gray.
Mhm.
And I remember thinking the birds are still singing outside my window, but I don't feel it in my heart. And for me, that was a pivotal moment. And I decided from that point forward to fight, to hear and feel the joy of those birds in my heart. And also, I had the blessing of a bereaved mother who came to visit me. And she had lost her son in a car accident many years prior. And she gave me hope that if she could survive, then it was
Mhm.
survivable. And
Mhm.
that for me was the second pivotal point, that if another mother could survive this heartache, then it's survivable. And maybe I can too. And so that becomes a mission, I think, for each of us bereaved parents, is to be that light of hope for others who are on the journey behind us, that if it is survivable, if life can go on, and you can learn to have joy the same time as sorrow, that life
Mhm.
is worth living, then maybe they can have it too. And if it can happen to us, it can happen to anyone. And life, truthfully, we have a great life now. I will
Mhm.
always miss my daughter, always, with every breath I take. But I have learned that the heart can hold joy the same time as sorrow. And in the beginning, I had to work really hard to find those moments of joy. But when I found them, I hung on to them.
Yeah.
Absolutely hang on to them. And now I don't have to, it's kind of like an exercise routine. In the beginning, it takes a lot of effort. Now I
Okay.
don't have to fight to find joy. It comes naturally. And I still have those moments where the grief knocks the breath out of me. But I
Mhm.
now know that those moments don't last as long as they used to. And the moments of joy are more frequently. And
Mhm.
that's something that no one taught me in the beginning. And I think it's so important to pass on to those behind us, that one day it won't always feel this raw.
Mhm.
Because had I not had any hope in the beginning, I would have just jumped off the next ledge.
Yeah.
What was keeping me here? The pain was
Mhm.
so great. And people would say, "You've got other children." Well, if someone chops off your left arm without anesthetic, you are in agony and you're not thinking, "Oh, well, I've got another arm."
It's
You're in a lot of pain and you just want that pain to stop. And so we really become those beacons of hope for other parents that life can be good again. It takes time, but it can be good again. It's worth living. And life can be a beautiful thing.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that, because that was also a pivotal moment for me. Although I was in a different place, I didn't know anyone who'd lost a child. I didn't have anyone I could turn to that I knew of. And I was one of those that Becca was buried and not cremated, and I would go out to the cemetery a lot
Mm.
and spent a lot of time out there. And some of what I would do would just wander the cemetery and read the tombstones and see that there were people younger than Becca that were buried out there, children very close to her age. She was 29. And so it's almost like you kind of get familiar with the people who are buried around your
The loved
child.
ones. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember one time I was standing at her grave, and I looked out at all of these tombstones, and knowing, what I'd read on so many of them. And all of a sudden it hit me, every single one of these tombstones represents someone who was deeply loved. And I knew some of them were children younger than Becca. And I know that they've made it through. And if they can make it through, then somehow I can make it through.
Mhm. Yep.
So it was that same thought of, if someone else can do it, then there's got to be a way for me to do it.
Yeah. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, I saw nearly every day of my life. And she was just a lovely, lovely soul. And what I didn't know growing up was that she had lost 3 children and a husband. She was pregnant with
Wow.
her 5th child when her husband died.
Mm,
And so she became a widow with 5 kids. And
mm,
so in her lifetime, she lost a husband and 3 living children. And so when I lost Ellie, I remember thinking, if my grandmother can survive losing 3 children and a husband, I can survive one. And what's interesting about it is that my grandmother was just a lovely soul. I never knew her not to have a smile on her face. And
mm,
so that's what kept me going forward, is knowing that, the grandmother that I knew was just full of love, not full of sadness.
mhm,
And when we lost our daughter, we had a grandson who was 2.5 at the time. And so I had that kind of as a guidepost for me. My grandmother became that guidepost of
mhm,
just keep moving forward, keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep getting out of bed, even though I didn't want to.
mhm,
And at first, it takes great effort just to get out of bed because you don't want to.
mhm,
But if you force yourself little by little, it doesn't, again, going back to that exercise routine as an analogy, with time and practice, it takes less effort. And before you know it, it's effortless. And that's what, my grandmother represented for me. And so I thought, well, if she can survive losing 3 children and a husband, I can survive too. And that's why, talking about it is so important, because we give that hope to
mhm.
others.
Yeah. No, back in those early days when there was so much confusion and just disorientation, I'm thinking maybe, because I think it's good to hear maybe some examples and to hear what have happened, a story from other moms or other parents. It kind of like, okay, well, that's what you did. Listen to what I did. And because we understand it, we can laugh at each other about it. I mean, I remember one time I got home from the grocery store and realized I didn't have any groceries in my car. I had left them at the grocery store. I, 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 I just
Well,
did.
that,
I got in my car and drove home.
that's the funny part, is that I don't even remember. That's the thing about it, is that you are in such a fog, and that fog lasts for quite a while. And so the biggest thing that I want other bereaved parents to know is to have grace with yourself. You
Yes.
aren't going crazy and you aren't losing your mind. We promise. It's
Hmm.
normal. It is so normal. Oh my gosh. I mean, the stories that I can remember, are just silly. like needing to go to the utility room and instead opening the closet underneath the stairs, like what, or you can't remember where you put your glasses. And people will say, oh my gosh, well, I do that all the time anyway. It's hard to describe to them the fog that you're
Yeah.
fighting through.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
really, a lot of the time, that autopilot is how you get through. I remember so many times going through stoplights, intersections in my car.
Mhm.
And it wasn't until after I went through the intersection, wondering whether my light was even green or red,
Mhm.
being in that fog. And I remember thinking, I shouldn't be driving.
Mhm.
We should not be on the road. But it's kind of like that autopilot. God got us through,
Yeah. Yeah.
through that intersection. That happened to me so many times because you're lost in thought. You're lost
Yeah.
in that fog of grief. And so
Mhm.
you won't remember how you got from A to B, just
Yeah.
that you did.
Yeah, I
So,
remember one time in particular, I can tell you exactly where I pulled my car over because I was driving and I had no clue where I was supposed to be going. I had no idea why I was on this road, where I was supposed to be going. And so I had to pull the car over and try to figure out where am I going to, I mean, or I remember one time in particular, like you said, people say, oh, I forget stuff like that. That just happens. And you're right. You can't describe it coming out of the store and having no clue where your car is. And it's like, oh, everybody does that. Yeah. But you know what? I have nothing in my brain to pull information from to help me remember.
right,
That's the thing.
right.
It feels like
That's the difference.
there's nothing there to help you think, oh yeah, I went in that door and I no, it's like there's nothing there. And to just that feeling of wandering the parking lot crying because you don't even have anything in your brain to pull the information from to try to
Right.
remember.
And that's the thing about trauma is that trauma creates fear.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a layer that we deal with on top of the sadness. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you come out and you're standing there thinking, I don't remember even parking my car, let alone where I parked my car, or maybe it
Yeah.
was stolen. And the fear
Mm-hmm.
in you rises up. And that's something that coexists alongside that sadness is a lot of fear. And that's something that people don't talk about also is that how much fear that we deal with. Are we going to lose another loved one unexpectedly or
Mm-hmm.
suddenly, or are we just going to lose another loved one, as if that itself is not traumatic enough?
Right.
Right? It's suddenly seeing things through a whole different filter. And that's why I call it a loss language, because there's certain dynamics that you can identify with when you share a certain type of loss, such as if you both lost a child, or if you both lost a loved one in a car accident, or if you both lost a loved one to a homicide. There's certain dynamics that you can identify with, and you don't have to explain anything to that person you're talking to. You
Right.
get it. You
Mm-hmm.
share that same language, that same loss language that no one else understands. And it's not something you can teach. It becomes your primary language, your first language. And then your English for us would then become our second. Grief becomes that first language. And that's how we see life through for a long time. That's the filter that we're operating through. And it's really, really challenging. But just
Mm-hmm.
keep putting one foot in front of the other, keep taking one breath, go from moment to moment.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually the sun does come out.
Yeah, we're not going to break into song here. Sun will come out. um, well, as you were saying that, I remember a couple of years ago, I'm pretty sure it was a BPUSA conference I was at, and someone, I want to say it was Michigan. I think it was, but he shared something that when you were talking, I just remembered, and it made so much sense to me. Is that it's almost like we're starting over as a baby. That our it's almost like our age in grief is like a baby being born. We have been born into the world of grief, and so a 3-month-old baby is helpless. they don't comprehend this new world they're in. All they can do is cry and hope someone will help them. And it's
Mhm.
like, wow, does that ever describe us? And you turn two and you're just kind of starting to get a little bit of legs and figuring
Yeah.
out how to walk around. And it it's like, wow, that really makes so much
It's a good
sense.
analogy, an excellent. And Mitch is wonderful at using analogies to help people understand. And he's also wonderful at using analogies to help give people comfort. Because
Hmm.
again, if you think about it like that, that really is how it feels. It's like your
Hmm.
whole world has been reduced to ashes,
Yeah.
and you have to relearn everything from the ground
Hmm.
up. And that doesn't happen overnight, nor does it happen in 6 months, nor does it happen in a year. It
Hmm.
takes time. It's a process, again, of learning to live with your loved one in your heart instead of your arms. And Mitch is just a wonderful speaker and a wonderful educator, and has such a gift with how he translates, all of this to people. So bless his heart.
Yeah. So I think, for anyone watching, the whole, if you kind of relate where you are to where would a child be on the spectrum, and even a 3-year-old child is still in a world of confusion. I mean, they they don't know. I mean, they really don't know what's going on around them. They're just kind of in their own little survival world of being a 3-year-old. It's like, help me. It's a great tool, I think, to remind ourselves, like you said, to give ourselves grace.
Yep. And patience. And, treat yourself as you would your own best friend. So
Yes.
if your best friend was in the ICU of the hospital, how would you treat him?
Hmm.
With tender, loving care and grace and
Hmm.
patience. That's how you should treat yourself. When you're grieving the loss of someone you love, you need to consider yourself in the ICU of Grief United Hospital and treat yourself that way. And
Hmm.
really, I think that's one of the things that is really important for people to understand, is to give yourself that grace and that patience, because everything does feel out of control. And when you're fighting through that grief fog and you just wondered, was that a red light or a green light? We have a natural tendency to berate ourselves, like, oh my
Hmm. Yeah.
gosh, what was I thinking? I should have my
Yes.
head screwed
Severe
on straight,
stuff.
you
Yep.
know. But again, you're fighting a natural process, and you can't make grief heal any faster than time itself. And your body's natural resilience and the reconciliation process that you have to go through, it is a process, and it's not going to happen any faster if you beat yourself up. And
Hmm.
so it's really about self-kindness and treating yourself as you would your own best friend.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, we're definitely in a healing process. And when we say healing, we're not talking about, like you said, going back to normal and as if nothing ever happened. I mean, that's impossible. But when we're talking about healing, we're talking about getting to the place where you're not just in survival mode, but you're beginning to work into life is worth living again, and there's meaning and purpose again.
Yes.
That is the place of healing that we're talking about. And I think about, when someone has a major surgery. Now, our daughter had an amputation at 3 years old.
Mm.
She went through chemotherapy. She was diagnosed with bone cancer, had her leg amputated. And so we had a front row seat to a child growing up with an amputation and everything that came along with that. And you know how you save things from your kids when they're little? I actually have her first little leg from when she was 3 years old. And so
Oh,
we travel with it, and it has become an illustration for
yeah.
us, because it is like having an amputation. Having our child die is like having a part of your very being cut off from you.
Very
And
much
you
so.
have to figure out how to live with that piece of you missing. And watching Becca do that, her life was different from the other kids. She didn't run like the other kids. She couldn't keep up with them. There were, things that she had limitations, but it didn't stop her from living a full life. I mean, she learned how to adapt and live a very full and happy life.
And so that's a beautiful example of she learned to adapt
Hmm.
and lived the best life she could. And I think about, loss has been around since the beginning of mankind. We're
Yes.
not the first parents to lose a child, and we're certainly not the last parents to lose a child. But what we hope is that moving forward, future generations are going to be better equipped to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
And, by talking about it, by opening the dialogue and helping each other understand that you can adapt, just
Mm-hmm.
like your daughter did. She learned
Right.
to adapt. And that meant that she had life with some challenges, but also some joy.
Yeah.
And that is what life is about. And so, going back to the ashes, people often think of someone who's lost someone they love, like a phoenix rising from the ashes. And really, I think about how we're reduced to ashes and we have to rebuild ourselves. And it's very, very true. And some days I think of myself like a teapot that's been shattered and glued back together. Some days the glue feels a little wet, like it might spring a leak. And
Mm-hmm.
other days that glue is strong and can hold boiling water. And that is, life. But I also want to share that in hindsight, I realized that the person that I have become is very different from the person I was before Ali died. And I remember one of my dearest friends was sitting next to me and she patted my leg and she said, "Well, I'm waiting for the old Lynda to come back." What I didn't know then was that the old Lynda would never come back. But the good news is that I actually like Lynda 2.0 a lot better. And it has taught me many things I wouldn't have learned otherwise, one of which is compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that those are some of the gifts that God gives us. And if you can look at it that way, you don't have to when you're in the beginning stage of that reconciliation and process and such. But at some point, when you begin turning your pain into purpose and you help other people, you realize that you're helping yourself to heal and that healing is a lifelong process. But at some point, you're like, okay, I actually think that I might be a better person because of this. And we call that collateral blessings. Some people call it post-traumatic growth. But the
Mm-hmm.
point being is that there's a silver lining and that, life can be good again. And I do feel I'm a much better person because of everything that, Ali taught me, both her life and her death.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing, a beautiful thing I'm very grateful for.
It is to think that we can still learn from our kids, even though they're not here on earth with us anymore. They have been a
Continue to touch
springboard.
our lives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like they became a springboard
Yep.
into a new version of us. And I know so many parents I talk to, and I'm sure you hear the same thing. Well, that may be true for you, but I don't see it happening for me.
Mm.
And I would have never thought that myself, even though we're aware of God's promises in the Bible. And when someone else gives us that scripture of, God promises he'll make it all work out for good, it's like, you don't throw that at me. I mean, it makes no sense. And
Yeah, you have to remember that when you're, when you're in pain, that's all you feel.
mhm,
You can't feel anything else when you're feeling pain, and your body can't tell the difference between physical pain and emotional pain.
mhm.
And so that is what your brain is absorbed with. So it's really hard to hang on to someone else's hope.
Yes.
But what we
Well,
can
and
do,
especially someone else's hope that's never been where you are, has
yeah,
never been in this darkness, and they try to throw those kinds of things at you.
platitudes and the
Yeah, that's
cliches and such.
hard.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. But that's the beauty in it as bereaved parents is we can turn around to the people behind us and promise them that one day it won't always feel this raw.
Mhm. Yeah.
So,
And something that you also talked about that I just want to kind of reiterate is that giving yourself lots of grace, because if we go back to that surgery example,
mhm.
anybody that's been through any kind of a major surgery, healing takes a long time.
Oh
And
yeah.
I mean, like my husband had quadruple bypass surgery at 48 years old. And that kind of a healing, it's a major, major healing. And, he's on medication for the rest of his life for
Right.
his heart.
And
And
he'll always
there's a
have the scar
scar.
from it.
Yes, there's a
He'll always have the scar, and
and
such
the
is
thing is,
grief.
we think we should be further along in our healing than we are, even in the physical. It's like, why is it taking me so? I know the doctor said it was going to be 6 months, but gosh darn it, it's been 4 months, and I thought he was just saying that. I thought it was gonna, I'd be so much better by now. When I had a hysterectomy, the doctor told me it was going to be like 6, 8 weeks, I think, to be out of commission. And I was an international children's minister at the time, and we had a conference that was going to be happening. And I thought I was going to be up and at 'em within like 4 weeks to be teaching Jewish hora dancing. I was so mad.
I know.
That doctor was right. I mean, it took months. I mean, it was like 6 to 8 weeks to just be able to get out of bed and be able to move again, and the months to just feel like you're even somewhat normal again. And we don't think about that. It's gonna take a lot longer than we think it should, or that we want it to, and we can start to feel better, and then we overdo it and we throw ourselves right back.
I call that the grief dance, where one day you take a side step to the left, one day you take a side step to the right, maybe one day you take 2 steps forward, maybe the next day you take a step back. There's no rhyme or rhythm to it. And it's really just about going along and celebrating those moments of joy. When the grief washes over you, just sitting and not fighting it. That's one of the things that I really impress upon people, is to not fight the grief. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, because we don't like pain. Right. But the grief, in the case of loss of a loved one, you have to process that loss. So the longer you push off that process, the longer it takes. And so if you can allow that grief to wash over you and just stay grounded as best you can, if not, wail on the floor. That's a gift that I gave myself, because I had heard early on that if you don't process grief, it'll come back to bite you. And I remember thinking, because I was already thinking, I'm in the belly of hell, how can it get worse? And yet I thought, I don't want to test that theory. And so I gave myself permission to wail on my daughter's bedroom floor. And, and I talked about her, and I did all these things that allowed me to process. And, one of the myths is that you recover from grief. That's not quite true, because life looks different, but you do reconcile the process. And again, it's really about learning to live with them in your heart, right?
Yes.
And, one of the things that we think of is that grief is something that, you recover from in 6 months or a year. And it's a process that can be lifelong. And that's what we need to start doing a better job educating society, so that future generations don't have the wind knocked out of them the way that we did. And it starts with opening the dialogues like you're doing right now. So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining me. You're doing the same thing. One of the things that can also be confusing and aggravating is when you see, especially if you're married and you lose a child, and you say it, you hear it, there's no wrong way to grieve. And yet it's like with your spouse, there's no wrong way to grieve, but you're doing it wrong because you're not doing it like me. And if you really loved our child, you would be doing it the way I do it. Or they're saying, you're doing this to yourself. You keep looking at the pictures. You keep going to the cemetery. Just stop it. You're doing this to yourself. And that can be confusing and frustrating, can't it?
Laura, I'm really glad that you brought that up, because grief is unique as a fingerprint. So even if you both shared the same loss, you had different dynamics. So I'm a different personality than my husband. So my relationship with my daughter is different than the one he had. Both of them equally loving, but different, because he's a man, he's wired different. I'm a woman, I'm wired different. So we have different dynamics around our loss. And one of the best things you can do for yourself and your spouse is to just hold that space, not judge, not guide, not critique,
Mhm.
When he needs to be held, you hold him. When you need to be held, he holds you. It's give and take. There's
Mhm.
no judgment. There's no restrictions. There's no parameters, because truthfully, you're not in his shoes, even though you lost the same loved one.
Mhm. Yep.
He's a different individual with a different personality. He's had different childhood traumas. He's had different experiences. And so he's going to process how he needs to process. And it might be different than yours.
Right.
And that's really, really important, that you not only give yourself grace, you give your spouse grace
Mhm.
as well. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's
Yeah.
a
I mean,
great.
we want our own space. We want grace given to us in the way we're grieving.
Mhm.
And so we need to give it to
Yeah.
especially those who are closest to us who are grieving the same loss.
And also, I remember hearing when we lost Allie, well-meaning people, they mean well, right? But they say things that you're thinking, how does that help? And one of the first things that we heard, and we heard it repeatedly, is that bereaved couples quite often divorce, that the statistics is something like 80%. The truth is, the statistics is no higher for divorce among bereaved couples than it is for non-bereaved couples.
Hmm.
And I remember when people told us that, I thought, well, you don't know Jamie and I. You don't know my husband and I then, do you? And we have a great marriage because we've been through the worst. There's
Yeah.
nothing else that can happen that is worse than that.
Right.
And we have that shared experience that no one else could understand.
Hmm.
And so a marriage can survive loss.
Yeah.
Further, it can actually go on to thrive.
Yes.
And so put on your horse blinders when people say, oh my gosh, you're going to get divorced and this and that and the other. Put on your horse blinders. Hang on tight to each other and give each
Hmm.
other grace, and just hold that sacred space
Yeah.
when you
I
grieve.
love that. Yes. Hold that sacred space. It
Yep.
is. That's exactly what it is. Thank you so much for saying that. Some parents, something that you said, and this is something that I like to hit on also, is having that joy and sorrow, the pain inside of you at the same time. And I remember, I mean, we've had some devastating things in our family, not deaths, but they were life-changing, family-altering events. And so when Becca died, it was the first time though that I had really, as I was going on this grief journey, I realized that there was peace and yet there was so much pain, and
Mhm.
it was a bit confusing at first because I always thought it had to be one or the other. If I wasn't walking in peace, it was because I'm not leaning on God enough, or else I'd have peace. And I realized as I was going along, because a lot of these things, it's like, okay, God, what's up with this? I mean, it changes everything. It changes your relationship with God too, which can become so much richer and deeper through this. And what I realized, what I felt like God showed me, was that peace is a fruit of the spirit. Peace is in our spirit. Pain is in our soul. And
Mm,
that's how they can both be in us at the same time.
right,
And
right.
so it's a matter of which one is rising to the top, or I mean, they're both there, but then learning to let that peace of the spirit rise above the pain of our soul.
Yeah. So, that's an excellent point, is that, my soul's in pain because my daughter is not here for me to smell her hair, touch her skin, and, talk with her and such. But my heart is at peace
Hmm.
because she's in heaven.
Hmm.
And so it goes back again that God created us where the heart can hold joy the same time as sorrow. We don't have to choose. And a lot of people get confused about that, because if they laugh or if they feel joy, they feel guilty.
Yeah,
Like,
like
oh my
you're
gosh,
betraying your
I
child or
shouldn't
something.
be, what
Yeah.
am I laughing at? Oh my gosh. And, furthermore, if you're smiling or you're laughing, people assume you're suddenly okay again. And really, it's because God built us with such complexities, even us ourselves don't understand
Hmm.
until we experience it.
Yeah.
And so that is how the heart can hold joy at the same time as sorrow. And we don't have to choose, because He built us that way. And who knew the heart could grow big enough to hold both?
Yeah. Yeah. It's an amazing thing. It is really an amazing thing. And we're blessed to be able to experience it, to get to the point where you can say, "Wow, God, this is a gift, and
Mhm.
I'm so blessed
Yeah.
to know this and to learn this and for that to be part of
Well,
my life."
and that's the thing is that the blessings, the collateral blessings that come from it, my path is crossed with the most
Oh,
incredible
yes.
souls on planet
Yeah.
Earth because of it that I would have never met
Mm,
otherwise, such as you. And so that's a
yeah.
blessing.
Oh, I agree.
All of these souls that my path is crossed with because
Mhm.
of my loss, I'm a better person because of it. God
Yeah.
has blessed me by crossing paths with people like you, and
Mhm.
I'm grateful. And
Yeah.
so a grateful heart is a happy heart.
Mhm. Now that leads me right to where I wanted to go next. Good job. um, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the things that I know that you're big on, and I've not heard you talk about it. I've just seen it on your website, and I love it. Is the 12 Nights of Kindness. And it's something that it looks like your family did for several years before Allie died. And then it just kind of came to a halt for a while. And then fairly recently it got finally got picked back up again. And there's something about helping others and doing things for others that does chemical stuff in the brain too, doesn't it? That helps us undo kind of what was done in the trauma.
Well, just like the heart can hold joy the same time as sorrow, the brain, as you know, is, when you're grieving, it's filled with the stress hormones, right? And
Hmm.
so when you understand that you have the power in you to trigger the happy hormones, that helps to offset the stress. And so the 12 Nights of Kindness is something that we started with our kids before Ali died. I wanted them to understand that giving is good for the giver. And I wanted them to think of Christmas, the miracle that it is about giving, just like we were given Jesus, instead of, oh gosh, what's on my list? What is it? And because children are, from a very young age, well, have you made your Christmas list for Santa? And this and that and the other. So I wanted my kids to really understand the concept of giving.
Hmm.
And I read it in a book written by a pastor, and they called it something else. And so I tweaked it, made it my own. And the kids and I started doing this, and we each picked a house. And the first year we did it, the first house we picked was a man who just lost his wife.
Hmm.
And it was really profound for us. And so we did it, and up until Allie died. And then, of course, when Allie died, I didn't have the bandwidth to do anything. It took all my brain bucks just to get out of bed.
Yeah.
And so we didn't do it for a number of years. And then when my grandson got to be about the same age as Allie and our youngest were when I started it, then I thought I need to get back out there because again, when we become givers of kindness, it's she who heals others heals herself, right? And so giving is good for the giver. And so I thought I wanted to teach him the joys of giving. And so it's really, really fun. And so the 12 Nights of Kindness is something that we look forward to. This last Christmas, we couldn't do it because my schedule just I wasn't home enough to do it. And but what was really cool about it is that a neighborhood family made us the recipients
Oh,
because
wow.
we had been givers in our
Oh,
neighborhood all those years that suddenly we became the recipient, and it was the coolest thing ever.
wow.
And it's so much easier to give than to receive
It
for,
is.
for some of us, right?
Yeah.
And so to be the recipient was just an incredible gift. And so
Yeah.
I'm really grateful for it. It was really fun. So yeah, the 12 Nights of Kindness is really something that I'm a big advocate of giving when you are trying to heal because it does release endorphins in your brain, and the happy hormones then kind of balance out the stress hormones, and it's good for your brain to have that respite from the pain.
Hmm.
And
It does
and
things like lower your blood pressure. It helps you
oh
sleep
yeah,
better
yeah,
at
yeah.
night. I mean, there's just all kinds of that you don't even think about health wise that it
No,
does.
it's called a helper's high. And you can there's also other little ways you don't have to do 12 nights of kindness to trigger the happy hormones. But yeah, so the 12 nights of kindness is something that I hold dear to my heart. And yeah, so
Yeah. it's kind of hard to go wrong with helping someone or doing something kind for someone else, isn't it?
Well, especially a few years ago, one of the families that we chose was a woman who was dying, and it was going to be her very last Christmas. And they had a 16-year-old in the house. And so this was going to be his last Christmas with his mom and with the family all together. And so we chose them. And she died a month after Christmas. And so it was really, really special to us that we were able to do that for them. We were able to take what was a really sad time and give them these little moments, these little respites of joy in the form of little surprise gifts on their doorstep every night for Christmas.
Mm,
So pretty cool.
well, yeah. So even in our pain and confusion, we have the power to change someone else's life, don't we?
We sure do.
We do. So, Linda, we're almost at an hour already, believe it or not. This has gone by so fast. It's like every time I do this, but this one really just whizzed right by. Do you just have any final thoughts that you want to share before we wrap this up? Anything that just hasn't come out yet that it's like, I want to make sure they know this.
I have so much that I want to share with people who've lost someone they love. The biggest thing is something that you hear over and over and over again is that you aren't alone, because you really aren't alone. We get it. We understand that confusion. We understand that grief fog. We understand going through the intersection, not knowing whether our light was green or red. Um, you know, we get it. But I just want you to know that one day it won't always feel this raw. I
Yeah.
promise you that. And
Hmm.
so hang on to that notion, even if you don't believe it right now and you think, oh, there's no way I'm going to feel anything other than this intense pain. Hang on to that idea, because
Yeah.
if it can happen to us, it can happen to you.
Yes. Yep. And
Yep.
that's exactly it. I had the same final thought was that, you and I are here to just encourage them that none of this is permanent. The confusion, the pain, it's not permanent. And you can fight your way out of it. And it takes time. It's a journey. You can have a life of meaning and purpose again. And it's not in spite of your child's death, but it's because of his or her life.
Absolutely. Well
Yeah.
said.
So thank you everybody for watching, and thank you, Linda. This was such a good conversation. I have a feeling I'm going to go back and rewatch this one. You had some
Oh,
really good nuggets there.
well, thank you, Laura, for doing this and for hosting all the wonderful people that you are. I know that, some of the guests that you're having on your show are just spectacular with so much wisdom to share. And so thank you for having this platform for bereaved people to come to and watch and just know they aren't alone, and that life can hold joy at the same time as sorrow. And I'm very grateful, because I wish that you had been around when I lost my daughter. I'm sorry that you lost your daughter, but I'm just so grateful that you're here now for all the
Mhm.
people that need someone to hold that light of hope for them. So you're doing a spectacular job, and I'm grateful.
All right, thank you. And how can people contact you or connect with you?
Oh, go internationalgriefinstitute.com
Okay.
and I look on about, and there I am.
All right, and I'll have a link for that down in the description so people can see that. And if you want to find out more about the 12 days of kindness, that'll be on there too. And also just want to encourage anyone else watching this to check out gpshope.org. It's Grieving Parents Sharing Hope, and that's where you can find where we offer resources and support for grieving parents. So thanks for joining us, and hopefully this was very helpful to you. That's our prayer for you. Thanks, everybody.
You got Stu.